Next Curve.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this Next Curve Rethink podcast episode where we break down the latest tech and industry events and happenings into the insights that matter. And I'm Leonard Lee, Executive Analyst at Next Curve, joined by the notorious Earl Lum of EJL Wireless Research. Hey, Earl, how's it going?
Hey, Leonard. Great to be here.
Yeah, really great to have you. And it's hard to believe that it was almost exactly a week, right? It was.
Yeah, it was a week ago.
Yeah.
And you're looking much better.
Yeah, that we were in Boston and I was heavily jet lagged because I made a last minute decision to fly out to Boston for Ericsson's Enterprise Industry Analyst Day. And yeah, it was great to see you there. I wasn't expecting it. I'm sure you didn't expect me.
I'm glad we had a chance to catch up on everything, and it was great to have you there again. I wasn't expecting you until you pinged me the day before that you were going to be coming. So that was a nice surprise.
Yeah. And before we get started, though, remember, everyone, to like and share and comment on this episode and subscribe to the Rethink podcast here on YouTube and on Buzzsprout. Take us on the road and on your jog and listen to us on your favorite podcast platform. And, make sure to follow Earl Lum. You want to know anything about radios? This is the man. And, we've been collaborating for quite some time on this podcast segment that we call From the Radio to the Rick.
Yep.
And we're ending up talking about a lot more. But today what we're going to do is take a moment to recap Ericsson's Enterprise Industry Analyst Day. And we'll also talk about some news that broke and some events that happened since. So there was T-Mobile's Capital Markets Day.
Yep.
And during that event, there were a lot of announcements. One in particular related to AI RAN and the lab that T-Mobile is setting up in partnership with Nvidia, Ericsson, and Nokia. So really interesting stuff happening. It's almost like all the stuff is happening for a purpose. Almost.
Could be. We'll see what that end goal is once they get it all together.
Yeah, some people call it a coinky dink. We might be looking at that kind of situation here. So, hey, let's dig into this. So we showed up Thursday morning, right? You and I across the street and from the One Boston Plaza. Hopefully I got that right, which has become sort of the traditional spot for the Enterprise Industry Analyst Day, which, you and I have gone for a few years, right? Already.
Yeah, I think it's. I think they created it to explain Vonage and to explain CradlePoint.
Yeah. I mean, this whole enterprise thing has been a big deal for quite some time, right? At least I would say 2-3 years, where there's been a lot of anticipation of the enterprise/industrial opportunity really opening up for 5G and creating, of course, all this fabulous, new revenue opportunities in a space that telcos, for the most part, haven't really made too many inroads and haven't really had a play in, right? And so,
yeah, I think the private 5G segment or piece of it is a part that they talked about, and again, it's. For Ericsson specifically, they have never been very good in the enterprise in terms of going to market, their channel partners, et cetera. So this is a renewed focus for the company to figure out how they're actually going to make it work and get revenues that are going to be hopefully growing over time.
So the event was kicked off by Eric Equidin, who is the global CTO of Ericsson, and he really led his talk with this topic of differentiated networks and high performance networks, and what he anticipates and sees as a growing demand for these services and network capabilities as operators continue to evolve and mature their networks along this 5G evolutionary path, right?
Right.
So, I think this is sort of a preamble that he set up to start talking about that big news item that came out of the event, which was the announcement of what they call NewCo, right?
Exactly.
Yes, and we asked, hey, what's the name? Is there a name for the NewCo? And of course, Nicholas Hoofdorf, who is the president CEO of Vonage, answered by saying no. And of course, I raised my hand and said, hey, that's a cool name.
Exactly. Which he then answered, we're not using that, Leonard. We'll find a better one.
And I thought that, I draw a few more laughs for that one, but I didn't. So I was a little bit disappointed. But that was a really big announcement. I mean, what did you think?
It will accelerate the sole network API thing that's been going on with Kamara and everything else that's been happening from the Nokia side and their partnerships and whatnot. And certainly it remains to be seen exactly how much revenue is going to be generated by all of this. But it certainly and potentially gets rid of a very big roadblock in terms of dealing with each one of these telcos individually. Mm-hmm. If you were a developer and now there's a clearinghouse or marketplace for all of their combined APIs that you can get access to via Vonage or via Google. So it's certainly a positive thing. And again, the question is, how quickly does this actually get the developer community on board and we start seeing applications and other services that are going to generate revenues for the operators?
I agree with you. One of the ways that I characterized this, upon the breaking of the news, and I didn't have a lot of time to really digest the details at that point, was that it really is kind of essential. And, one of the things I mentioned to Nicholas is that this is a pretty catalytic move, right? It's actually making something happen around these APIs. And, one of the things that everyone should be clear about is, the Open Gateway Initiative and the Linux Foundation project, which is Kamara, which is defining these network APIs. Those are just establishing standards and defining those interfaces. It's not actually implementing anything. And to your point, Earl, what the NewCo does is actually implements a marketplace through an aggregator type business model that is operating in a what I'm calling now a network capability as a service model, right? And the reason why I say network capability is that term came up several times. In fact, if you look at the press releases, there's mention of network capabilities, and that's what we're really looking at. And you can look at capabilities in terms of, let's say, a network function, but then also a more abstracted service that the NewCo might actually design. Now, whether or not they're going to do that, that's an open question. It's something that I did ask Eric as well as Nicholas, but I think that's really where the opportunity is going to lie. I think with many of the functions, we see some of the CPaaS players, they're all already dabbling in some of these services, especially related to security and fraud. But as these APIs become more well-defined and standardized, I think there's an opportunity for entities like the NewCo to define services that are going to be value added on top of baseline API services that these APIs expose in participants' networks, and then provides additional value for developers to tap into. And so that everyone knows, there's 12 operators who are now committing and also are slated to invest into this NewCo. And it's not an entity that has been established yet, but what Ericsson shared with us at the event, as well as in the press release, is that they've managed to get some of the world's largest telco operators on board, and I'll just name the ones that are participating. So American Mobile, AT&T, Bharti Airtel, Deutsche Telekom, Orange, Reliance Jio, Singtel, Telefonica, Telstra, T-Mobile, Verizon, and Vodafone. So that's quite the mouthful, and they represent a large portion of the global subscription base for mobile. And so yeah, it's a pretty big deal, and it is kind of like, grabbing the bull by the horns and making something happen, right? That which is beyond just defining APIs and stuff like that. Those are mechanics of things. That's not actually the business. This is actually trying to establish a business and a capability that developers can tap into.
Right. And I think that that's a key differentiating factor if you compare the Nokia partnerships that have been announced on the network APIs. Again, the partnerships may also allow for some path for the developers to be able to get access and everything, but it's not creating a business model like NewCo is doing, which is really how I think that's different than what's been announced before. And again, hopefully it'll allow for a faster roadmap to monetization for these operators in terms of how that marketplace is going to act. And that'll happen sometime, ideally in, I guess, Q1 of 2025 is when that's supposed to get all the regulatory approvals cleared. And again, it's a 50-50 joint venture. So Ericsson has 50% and the other 12 operators have the other remaining 50%. And again, it currently doesn't include China. It doesn't include Korea and Japan. And we'll see what happens. But again, it's a very big chunk of the global market. And hopefully it'll make it as close to turnkey for a lot of these software developers to be able to leverage into, whatever cool things are going to do with these, with exposing these network APIs.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you brought up South Korea, because recently the three announced, I think it was an MOU or something like that, that they were going to create a regional exchange themselves, right? Where they would, that would serve as a broker for services via these open APIs through a exchange type of vehicle. And so it's more than likely we're going to see a number of these, both global scale as well as regional, maybe even local exchanges start to pop up that cater to certain developer communities, that cater to certain specific markets and certain scales of applications and access needs, right? Because some of these use cases are not going to be global at scale, and these services are not going to be global at scale. They may solve a more regional or local problem, right?
And I think we should expect that the three Chinese mobile operators are going to do something similar for the China market, right?
And so it's going to be interesting to see how all this stuff plays out. But one thing is certain, there needs to be a differentiation play. And that I think we still need to wait and see what that actually looks like. The other thing I think that's really interesting is that with this announcement, they managed to get T-Mobile, AT&T, and Verizon engaged in this NewCo venture, which I think is really interesting. So speaking of regional scope, I think that's covered there. And so there can be some nice regional problems in the North American market that can be addressed. Then, of course, you have Telefonica in the mix as well. So Europe plus, LATAM with Deutsche Telekom, Orange, right?
Right.
Then you have also Bharti Airtel.
Yep, and Reliance. So you have India.
There's India.
A big chunk of India is included. So yeah, it's a it's a huge footprint if you look at it from a geographical perspective. And again, it clears a way to get scale. And I think that was the issue, in that if you had to deal with each of these operators specifically and separately, how long would that take, and how much effort would that be, and how difficult would it be to actually get something done if you were the developer? And would you have to have however many versions of your app, service, or whatever it is that's using that network API, because you had to individually broker a deal with each of these operators? And how long would that have taken?
Right. And this approach, you mentioned Nokia before, does differ from what we've seen in Nokia and their efforts there with network as code, where they're approaching SIs, trying to build their network of developers, right? That broaden their market with developers, which I think they're looking at SIs as really being the source of that market.
Right.
Whereas one of the things that NewCo is going to take advantage of is Vonage's developer community, which is, I think, about 1.2 million. So it's a large number of developers.
Right. And Google's developer community.
Yeah, and then the Google developer community. But I also, if I'm not mistaken, Nokia also has Google in their camp. But it's interesting how you see these different plays, different strategies in approaching, I call this the network capability as a service opportunity, right? In terms of a fundamental business model. This is what it's different from CPaaS, it's different from contact center as a service, and it's different than network as a service, right? This is really, going back to what I was saying, an abstraction layer above the network that really marshals an interaction between these new network capabilities, okay, which can either be functions or abstracted services that then developers can access. And so, I'm sure that notion will be challenged, but hey, we're all trying to figure out what this stuff is. Right.
Right. And, again, when you look at those capabilities, I think Eric alluded to, again, the high performance differentiated networks, the latency, the quality of service, speed, reliability, all of those things, positioning. I think all of those are capabilities specifically for a private network, depending on who's the end customer and which one of those you need to tap into, and what are the services, again, if it's specifically for robotics or whatever that's happening out there that you want to leverage, that's inherent within the network.
Yeah, and so why don't we blend a little bit of some of the things that we heard from the T-Mobile Capital Markets Day in here. Because one of the things that is pretty obvious is T-Mobile really likes to flex their muscles about their 5G deployment and the maturity of their 5G network, right? Which is, in the US market, is the only one that is standalone, 5G standalone. So they assert, right? And
exactly.
Their participation in this is interesting because it really pushes the competitive envelope of 5G amongst all participants, actually, because the T-Mobile network is going to obviously be able to capitalize on 5G Advanced, which they made a very, very big deal out of. That will enable them to take advantage of a lot of these really advantageous bets that they made on spectrum. But I felt that they're really trying to push the industry overall from a competitive perspective toward getting the ball moving on 5G evolution, right?
We're touting, obviously, their superior spectrum because it was all lower in frequency, better in coverage, et cetera, during Capital Markets Day. But again, I think over the past several years, while they were, not the leader, trying to figure out how they could be more nimble and do things in a different way, right? In terms of digitization and Siebert talked about how, we don't want people spending half a day in a T-Mobile store trying to port over their phone and all of this other stuff from a customer experience. It needs to be fully digital, and they can do it without having to go into the store because they can do it over the air, and all of these other experiences that they're talking about to try to advance the telco model from, where it has been stuck in this very analog of, again, having to go into the store for several hours to figure out how to get a new phone or how to get something ported over or how to get a new service instead of just doing it on the device itself. So I think T-Mobile also has been one that has been an operator to rock the boat and to stir the pot in terms of they were highly negative and anti-millimeter wave in the early days of 5G here in the US, and continue to remind everyone of what Verizon was trying to do, which is crazy, right? On small cell millimeter wave. So I think their tactic continues to try to push the envelope on the tech side. And that's kind of what my takeaway was in listening to their plan on how they're leveraging that. And obviously, I think they're going to try a lot of different things. And the question is going to be what really sticks, what actually is feasible and is going to work, given all of these wonderful potential R&D projects that they have going on with the AI RAN, et cetera.
Yeah, and the AI RAN was a big announcement that came out of that event, which is that collaboration between T-Mobile, Nvidia, Ericsson, and Nokia. The whole idea there, they're really pitching the future of the telco RAN infrastructure and making it AI native, I guess, is like the simplest way of describing it. Looking at how do we reinvent and rethink a network infrastructure and architecture based on NVIDIA's stack is really what it boils down to.
Right. And the good thing is at least both Ericsson and Nokia were included in that announcement. So at least that sets the tone in terms of their ecosystem. And again, I think they're trying to extract whatever they can out of the technology, whatever that's going to give them an advantage, and whatever is also going to increase their efficiency as a mobile operator. And I think that's something that every mobile operator needs to be looking at, is how do you get to that level? And I think the first thing is you somehow have to get the SA and standalone at some point and bite the bullet on the backhaul and on separating out or having a dual core and all of those wonderful things that just have to happen to migrate from where NSA is today. And I think, again, that's going to be a question for every CFO at the mobile operator entities to figure out how much is this going to cost them to be able to do it.
Yeah, and another big theme of AI RAN is this idea of converged AI compute and the RAN compute. ARC1 is really that hardware platform. It's based off of GB200 NVL2, so it's just the server size version of a Grace Blackwell GPU unit. Okay, and the Grace processor is a CPU, right? It's ARM based.
Right.
Then you have Blackwell, which is the up and coming GPU, the new GPU that's coming from Nvidia. And so it's 2-to-1, 2 GPUs to 1, Grace CPU. And the whole idea is that you can handle all of the RAM processing on these boxes, as well as any of the third-party or ancillary AI computing, as well as the infrastructure intelligence, right? Because we have to remember the whole idea is to make the RAN more intelligent. And so that's one of the things that a lot of people don't talk about. They like to talk about AI compute for third party, but then, there's this big question of the cost of intelligence for a smarter RAN, right? And what does that load? And how does that factor into, all the things that we were concerned about before? Sustainability, right?
Yeah, and again, how much is this going to cost a mobile operator to implement? How much is it going to cost T-Mobile to do? And again, is it changing the architecture from a distributed RAN into a more centralized ran to the cloud or wherever they want to be, and where do these servers sit physically in the network is going to be an important part of this new architecture that they're looking at.
Yeah, and so these are going to be things that I'm sure that all the participants, Nokia, Ericsson, T-Mobile, as well as Nvidia, are going to discover. Right? They're going to figure out, well, how does all this stuff work? So it'll be interesting to watch how all of this develops in the lab and how quickly things actually get deployed out into T-Mobile's network. And we'll
right. And is anyone else going to have the money to be able to do this? I think is an important question to ask. And what is the cost of this technology to get you to this version of AI RAN versus maybe another architecture for AI RAN?
Yeah. But yeah, and I think one of the hopes is that with these, let's say, AI RAN capability sets, right, as you make a transition from traditional, what we know and love as the RAN today with its functions and features and service delivery capability, or non-functional capabilities, how that expands with AI RAN, and then how do these network APIs in terms of new AI RAN enabled network capabilities, how do those enhance the value proposition of something like what NewCo is going to be looking to deliver to developers, right? And so there's that big question as well. But it seems like all this stuff is interrelated, and it is being positioned to get people thinking, or the industry to think in terms of thinking different.
Yeah, and again, it's leveraging and making use of the assets of their 5G network, and a better use of it, hopefully. And but again, it's predicated on having a certain baseline that T-Mobile has the luxury of having that a lot of the other operators haven't migrated to yet, or not fully there yet. And so I think it'll be an interesting way to look at what they're doing and what can be gleaned from what they're doing for other operators to see, is this the right path that they need to go down, or do they need to go down a different path?
So let's talk about the other big headline or topic of interest that surfaced. There was a lot of talk about neutral host, right?
Yeah.
And that topic was encapsulated in a lot of the presentation material related to CradlePoint, which is now Ericsson.
Exactly. Rebranded.
Yeah. Now we have three main product groups within Ericsson. Ericsson CradlePoint, right? So it's not like CradlePoint totally disappeared. It's now a product group. Ericsson Private 5G,
right,
which is a lot of that traditional Ericsson Private 5G, largely focused on industrial. Ericsson Enterprise 5G coverage. Now, this one is really, really interesting. And you want to take a shot at explaining to our audience what this little nugget is all about?
Yeah, essentially what enterprise 5G coverage brings to the table for the first time for the industry, at least from an in-building perspective, is that Ericsson is going to provide a neutral host turnkey solution that will, from day one, have connectivity to all three nationwide mobile operators here in the United States. So AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile will all be connected into this neutral host solution. And so if you're an enterprise client, typically, if you want in-building signal coverage, the first thing you ask anyone is, I want everyone in my building. Mm-hmm. And usually what happens is everyone says, sure, but they're lying and they don't deliver all three operators. They might have two. Typically, they start with one. And so the client ends up being extremely disappointed. So this takes away that uncertainty. And it's, I don't even know how to stress how important that is from an uncertainty perspective of guaranteeing that all three signals are going to be in your building from day one when the network is turned on is a huge event within the in-building marketplace, because no one's been able to say that. The prior neutral host companies that were the tower cos like American Tower and Crown Castle, they were all saying that they could potentially get all three in or prior when Sprint was still around and had not merged, to get all four of them in. And that's never happened. And I think this is a unique opportunity for Ericsson to take advantage of, again, given the relationships they have with all of these operators. And certainly it's a proving point, and could migrate to other regions and other countries where they can have the same setup in the UK, in France, in Germany, where, again, they could do something that the other DAS suppliers may or may not be able to do, which is to have all of the nationwide operators in those specific countries be in the building from day one. And again, this is leveraging radio dot. So this is not your traditional DAS system that is out there. It's using the radio dot system. And I think it's going to be pretty cool. And according to them, it'll be up to 10 million square feet. And you could also layer on a private 5G network on top of this neutral host option that they have. So is it something for a stadium? Not at this particular point in time, but you can certainly hack it and change the radios and have higher power radios and a different architecture. As long as they can bring the neutral host part, then it could be for, any venue at all that's out there. So I think that's a very important key thing to note, and we'll see how quickly they can make a dent in the market.
In a lot of ways, this mirrors what they've done with NewCo, right? In that they've aggregated these carrier participants into this service. And so it's interesting to see this managed service, if you will, business model or approach being utilized here as well.
Right. And there could be a couple of different business models too. Traditionally, the end customer or the building owner, whoever, had to pay upfront 100% for the total cost of the network. And given that it's going to be a fully turnkey managed services, that could be distributed over a period of time, so they don't have to bear the full price of it upfront, and then could be amortized over how many years. And I think that makes it easier from a barrier to entry for a lot of the building owners that are not willing to pay that big chunk of money to get that network deployed.
So yeah, one of the things that we posted, or at least I posted and I tagged you on it, is that we had both at the event described the solution to OSA as being disruptive, right? And we never give this designation lightly, right? Because first off, I'm not a big fan. I mean, I think you only say something is disruptive once it's actually disrupted something. But Manish Tiwari, he showed us a picture of what that disruption looks like, right?
Right.
So I thought that was pretty.
And again, to be fair, that was probably a 50-sector type of a stadium DAS that he showed within a building, and et cetera. Okay. And that's not necessarily an enterprise application where you have 4 floors and maybe, a couple of 100,000 square feet to cover, and you're not trying to provide service to 100,000 people. So, but I think he made the point in terms of all of the plumbing that's typically required in a DAS solution, the craziness of taking a macro radio and cranking it down in power by 99% using attenuators, and then feeding that into a head end for a DAS. So there's a lot of pieces in a traditional DAS that take up a lot of room and waste a lot of power, et cetera. And again, this could be disruptive in that you have one 9U high rack mounted box on a wall that he showed. But again, that's probably looking at a couple of sectors and not 50 plus that you would find in a stadium. But he made his point in terms of how crazy it could be.
Way to keep them honest. But still, I thought they did a really good job of providing this shock value, or at least selling the disruption. I've been so focused on all the AI supercomputing stuff for the last few months. I kind of took my eye off the telco ball for a while, but now getting back into it, wow, there's some serious stuff going on here. And so I think it's going to be a very, very exciting next few months at the least, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And T-Mobile is usually one of the big sponsors of MWC Las Vegas. So we'll see if they're able to talk about this AI RAN roadmap during MWC Las Vegas, or are they going to stick with what they've done in the past in their booth? And we'll have to wait and see if what else is going on with Open RAN, the CBRS Alliance, and all the stuff that's happening here in the U.S.
Yeah, and I'll look forward to that update from you. I'm skipping out this year. So it's all on you, Earl. You're going to have to report back to me with all of your.
Well, I will let you know what is good and what is ugly.
The good, bad, and ugly of
Exactly.
telecom. Yes. So, hey, everyone, thanks for hanging out with us. We really appreciate your listenership and viewership, and we hope that the discussion here was insightful and valuable to you. Make sure that you check out Earl Lum, his research at EJL Wireless Research at www.ejlwireless.com. Any other ways that you want folks to contact you?
All my stuff is on LinkedIn, so they can reach me there or on the website. So they know how to get a hold of me, I would assume.
Yeah,
I hope.
You can find him here as well. He's a
Exactly.
guest. So, yeah, make sure to subscribe, though, right? Subscribe to our podcast, which
Absolutely.
which
We have important things to say. And hopefully you have questions that you're asking yourself after you listen to this.
oh, I'm sure always people do, right?
Oh, that's the hope.
Yeah. So, yes, subscribe to the podcast featured on the Next Curve YouTube channel. Check out the audio version on Buzzsprout and find us on your favorite podcast platform. Also, subscribe to the Next Curve research portal at www.next-curve.com for the tech and industry insights that matter. And we will see you next time, definitely after MWC Americas, or is it Las Vegas 2020?
Las Vegas.
Yes, where Earl will give his hot takes and cold takes. Good
And
takes,
mediocre takes and whatever takes.
Yeah. And so until then, take care and we will see you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.